You're welcome to the Naija Filmmaker, a podcast about Nigerian filmmakers, their films, and how we can build a diverse and functional industry. I'm your host, Select Got. On this episode, my guest is Kenneth Gyang. He's an award-winning writer and director, known for Confusion Nawa, The Lost Cafe and Oloture, among others. Amongst his awards is the 2012 AMAA for Best Nigerian Film for his debut feature, Confusion Nawa. We talk about his formative years in Jos, being a student of cinema, and his latest project. If you're a new listener, you're welcome and I hope you enjoy. You're welcome to the Naija Filmmaker, Kenneth.
Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself?
I've started making films after coming out of film school because I went to the National Film Institute in Jos. And so studying film and falling in love with the magic of it, I felt that I could be able to entertain people with the sort of stories that are in my head. So immediately after school, I went to work with the BBC and I worked on a show called Waiting Day, which was probably one of the biggest shows in Africa at that time. And from Waiting Day, I went on to the Berlinale Talent Campus with a short film of mine, and I met a friend. So we formed a production company together called Cinema Pata Pata. And so we applied for funding for our first film called Confusion Nawa from Netherlands. And because it was pretty hard to get the kind of to get people to sponsor the kind of film that we wanted to make at the time.
Yeah.
So we got from Netherlands and we made this film, and so it eventually won the Best Film at the Africa Movie Academy Awards, which was one of the biggest awards in Africa at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, right now you have, but yeah. So it won AMAA, it won it opened New York African Film Festival, it won jury prize at the Pan African Film Festival in LA. And from there, I made the Lost Cafe, which won the Best Feature Narrative at the Mexico International Film Festival and also Audience Awards at AFRIF. And Oloture, which probably was one of the films that opened Nigeria to the world when it came out in 2020 on Netflix, because it was a Nigerian film to be in the top 10 on Netflix. And so... it was really, it actually brought up a lot of conversation about sex trafficking and all of that. So in a nutshell, yes, that is me.
Oh, okay. Very eventful career so far.
Yeah.
So you talked about like what you have done since you went to film school and after film school. So can you tell us like what got you to make this decision to go into film? What were those years before film school like? I mean,
I've always been like pretty good at reading. Like I love to read, and so growing up in Jos, I actually thought that Jos was that like the whole of Nigeria was like Jos. You know, the weather, the mountains, the easygoing people, the flowers they see around, and basically like I was reading the works of people like who's the writer from Kenya, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, actually. So I was reading, like, when you read books like The River Between, right, you could actually visualize it. And you visualize it, and if you're from Jos, like, when he's talking about all these valleys and, of course, like, white people and the colonials, it was something that was really around us at the time. And so, but for me, as a kid, we used to actually have this show we call it show, basically. It's our own cinema show, where you put the lantern behind a white curtain and you cut out characters with carton, and you actually entertain people because the shadows fall in front of the screen, and so children sit in front, and you're basically entertaining them. And it was always about who had the best characters and who can actually tell the best stories that will attract the audience. So that was actually like my first thing about falling in love with filmmaking. But then I didn't actually know that until one day when I was growing up. I just said, okay, maybe I need to just go and study film, because I was reading all these booklets that were flying around in school. And so I was in love with going to study film abroad, but it was too expensive. So one day I saw that there's actually a film school in Jos, and I went there. And that for me, that was it. I went there and I thought I was going to just be a writer, but then I realized that someone made my film and I didn't like the way he interpreted it. So that's how I then turned to directing as well. That I said, okay, I can just write myself and just direct it as well, because I just didn't like the interpretation. So that for me is a whole background for me, like because Just is very small, and but it had a lot of intellectuals, and there are lots of like white people because of the tin mining that brought them to Just at the time. So yeah, it was that sort of environment that encouraged me to explore my creativity.
Nice. So, like there's this thing that people say about Just that it kind of fosters creativity. What do you think it is?
Well, so like looking at it now, right? Like, I just got back from, I was in Lagos for almost like 8 months, and I decided to move to Lagos, but I just came to Just on holiday and to look around locations for my movie. And I just realized what it was. What it was that pushed all of us into that whole creative thing is that the serenity of the city. Like you have a lot of nature around you, like the trees, the mountains, and then of course like you had this whole white people that were here. Mostly British, and of course like some Americans who were here because of mining. But then what happened was that when they travel, right, they used to come back with a lot of magazines, and they used to come back with a lot of like music for our radio stations. So our radio station was probably almost like the best in the country, because like we had access to a lot of materials, because I remember then like it was very hard to just get magazines like that. And so even when Cool FM came to Nigeria, I think like one of the first people that they got was a DJ from Just, I think that was like Yakubu Lamai. So that whole thing where everybody's actually aware, and we had this whole influx of like people coming in with some form of like culture, opens us to culture. And because it's a very small town, there's actually interaction. Like Lagos is very big, so even if you have foreigners, but nobody cares, like because people are just like trying to mind their business. But here is a little interaction that you actually get around, so it really opened up our heads, and we're in a space where everything is just so calm, and you're actually allowed to think and not just be on the run to go and look for money, which it's what you get with capitalism, and you can't really be very creative if you are just thinking about the economics of it.
Yeah. So, you made Omule, Mommy Lagos, Finding Aisha, Blood and Henna. You did all this before you did Confusion Now. What, like from your first experience of making a film, directing a film, what were some of the important lessons you started learning quite early on?
I think like for me, it was always about telling your own story and what you actually believe in, right?
Yeah.
And so I made those films. I remember how I made Omle and Mommy Lagos. It was because I didn't have money to have the right set of camera. And so my friend who was my producer, right, on the Lost Cafe later on in life, but then we're in film school, and so she wanted me to direct a documentary for her. So we went to Calabar and we shot it. But when coming back, I had the idea to enter Berlin Talent Campus with my film, with a film. So I had an idea. That was Mommy Lagos. But the thing that I actually learned is that you need to know almost everything in film, because at the time there was no money. So I had to just manage to get my friend to just film Mommy Lagos for me. But then I had to edit it. Like you have to think about writing it, then you have to edit it, so you're producing it and all of that. So I learned paperwork really, really early in terms of because that's actually what film is about. When I look back and I look at like what is happening right now in the industry, why the industry didn't really move forward, over the years, was because a lot of people didn't want to do a lot of the paperwork. And so, and if you can't do, you cannot be able to apply for funding. And that was what I actually learned, at the time, that you need to know everything, and you can't be lazy, and you need to take every sort of opportunity that just comes your way. So, and which I've actually applied in later in life, because after Confusion Now, with Confusion Now, I had to get the actors that I know to work in the film for free because I didn't have money to pay them. And then for the Lost Cafe, I had to get in touch with Angino to give us lenses, because I didn't have the sort of money to to get the sort of lens that they have, but so we did some sort of partnership. So it is that thing that you always have to just capitalize on a given opportunity, and not be lazy and try to do paperwork. That I really learned like very early on in life.
Yeah. Okay. So you got selected for Berlin Talent Campus. How was that?
No, with the Berlin, when I made Mama Lagos, it was for a competition at the Berlin Film Festival.
Yeah.
And it's called, I mean, it's under a category called films based on taste, films on taste, films on hunger, food taste, or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I submitted the film, but I was pretty confident that I was actually going to get it. And so it was an official selection at the Berlinale Talent Campus, which is like maybe 10 films from like maybe almost like 600, 700 applications at the time.
Yeah.
And it was very exciting for me because I had never left Jos at the time, right? I've always been just home based. So, and I traveled to Germany, and I met a lot of people, and I understood that my philosophy about film wasn't really misplaced, that I was on the right track. And that was actually what I learned. And it was in Berlin that I got the job with the BBC, because someone saw my short film and he just asked me, do you want to work with the BBC? And I said yes, and he just hooked me up with Smoking Dogs film. So yeah, for me it was really exciting, but it was like a way, it was a huge thing for my career and the career of other young people, because what that did was that when I had conversations with the BBC, I then told them about other young people in Jos, and that is actually how almost everyone that worked on Waiting Day got into there, because I told the BBC about it. So the careers of like, I mean, people like Yinka, Ifanyi, almost everybody, like, started from Waiting Day.
Yeah, before we get to your work at the BBC, what kind of director would you say you are? What do you always like try to include in all the films that you make?
That is like left for people who watch the film to actually analyze it. So I think like, I mean, it's actually up to you, people who actually make all these programs and write and watch movies and do analysis, to actually talk about what sort of like director I am. But like, I think it's like pretty, it's going to be like pretty shallow for me to say, okay, yes, like, I mean, this is the sort of director that I am. It's left for people to just analyze my work and talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about Confusion Nawa. I think one thing, you're one of the writers, and one thing this film was able to succeed at was, like weaving these like interconnected stories with a lot of characters, and I mean, it felt like you kind of got a good sense of who like these multiple characters were. Like, how was the script development phase of that project?
Well, I mean, for Confusion Hour, before making Confusion Hour, I was a huge fan of Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu and what he did with Amores Perros, right?
Yeah.
And of course, there was like Tarantino's Pulp Fiction and all of that. And I'm a real student of cinema. Like, I really study films and I study characters and all of that. And when we wanted to tell a story, because of where I grew up in, and that was, I mean, that's Jos, right?
Yeah.
Jos is a very multicultural city. So you have people from the east, the west, the north, like central Nigeria. Everybody's here in Jos. And so the whole idea is to make a film that is set within that multicultural city, and how every character's motivation or action will actually affect the other character. And so that was what we designed. And when we wrote the scripts, it is very different from the way it came out in the film as well, because what we did was that we wrote it in chapters. So you could actually see an element of this person's story in this person's chapter. It was like that. But when we made the film, for me, I had to just tone it down a bit, because I wanted to make a film, like I got inspired by an Egyptian film called the Yakubian Building, which the guy too was part of the Berlinale Talent Campus and was hugely successful. And I remember I read about it, and it says that it was the most successful film in Egypt at the time. And so for me, I just felt, okay, so if I'm making, I have to make it for the local audience, right? Like my people need to actually understand the film a bit.
Yeah.
So I had to just like think with the edit a bit. And it took us almost like 3 years to cut the film because my partner is in the UK, the editor is in the UK, or sometimes in Ireland. So sometimes I travel with the whole hard drive and the computer to go and edit there. And then Tom will like, come down here. So for me, but like everything that was fleshed out that you actually see in the film, like, it was something that their characters are very relatable in terms of like growing up, in a very multicultural city. So the easiest thing that I'll tell you about the writing and character development is that like, you don't need to always think far when you are developing characters because people always just want to say, okay, I want to get into this room and think about this particular character. There are lots of people around you. You could actually just like fashion your character after one of them. So that was the process for writing the characters of Confusion Hour.
So yeah, let's go to your work at BBC. So you went to Berlin, you met somebody, and then the BBC job happened. You guys, you formed the core team for Waiting Day. How career defining was this experience for you?
Well, as I said, right, when I got to do the interview with Smoking Dogs Film, and then of course, like later on, we're having a conversation with one of the producers there.
Yeah,
that was what inspired them to come to Jos and to come and look at filmmakers. And we sent more CVs of like, other young filmmakers. And when you look at career defining today, almost that whole, the cult of young people that were on Waiting Day right now are some of the best filmmakers that you have in Nigeria, right?
Yeah.
In terms of production design, cinematography, sound, and all of that, right?
Yeah.
And for me, on a personal level, it is understanding storytelling because you can never beat the BBC in terms of storytelling. We had storyliners come in and the producers knew what they were doing in terms of storytelling. And that is one key factor that I'm really using now in my career because a lot of people really don't understand how to tell on-screen stories.
Yeah.
And so they totally depend a lot more on just mere dialogue to pass across information instead of like thinking about other visual things that they can actually add. So and BBC is a really huge brand name. So when you tell people that you've worked with the BBC, of course, like they have to just look at you twice because it's a fantastic CV. So yes, in terms of development mentally to make stories, yes, and of course, like in terms of CV, yes, it was huge in my development as a filmmaker.
Okay. You mentioned that you're a student of cinema, so are there like some filmmakers that you always kind of take inspiration from?
I take a lot of inspiration from filmmakers like Alejandro González Iñárritu, who came in from a minority background and to make it big in Hollywood. And even before Hollywood, I was following his career with Maurice Perez and what he was able to do with that. I absolutely love Alfonso Cuarón as well, and I think like Children of Men is one of my really big favorite films. And you look at David Lean and what he did with Lawrence of Arabia and Quentin Tarantino. And for me, it's like as an indie filmmaker, right? Practicing in a country like Nigeria where there was this whole notion that, this a cabal of marketers who will only just let you come into their circle when you do certain things, or like, if you just like kiss the ring or whatever it is that they say. And so it inspired me to be a rebel, to stand alone and keep working on projects that I believe in and just like developing my own projects. And so like right now, I think it's actually really paying off because I've seen like how big Alfonso Cuarón, how they started and with Robert Rodriguez and how they started and where they are right now.
Yeah.
And for me, it's almost like the same thing because like when we used to talk about making universal stories and films that can actually really travel out of Nigeria, everybody kept saying that, okay, no, home video, you have to just tell stories that for Nigerians and all of that. But right now, with the coming of Amazon and Netflix and all of that, like we're really up against other global filmmakers. I mean, we're really against, I mean, other filmmakers from other parts of the world. So that is for me the inspiration that has really worked in terms of like looking at the careers of these people and how they stood their ground in articulating their thoughts into projects that they believe in. And for me, and how it really paid off for them in Hollywood. And it's the same thing for me right now. So yes. And even in terms of like, I mean, telling very different stories, because most of them started almost like thought cinema, right? I mean, it's not like because they didn't have to make all these glamorous Hollywood big commercial films that they always make. So doing whatever you can to make a film and just getting your story out there. So yes, that for me, it's like those are the filmmakers that really inspire me out there in Hollywood.
So apart from studying at the NFI, you also studied screenwriting in Ouagadougou.
Yeah, going to Ouagadougou for me was from film school, and I was nominated because I was one of the best students in the school. So they were nominating the best students to actually go to Ouagadougou for a workshop with Gaston Kabore. And, you know, when I was in film school, I used to read a lot of books about African cinema. And what was really disheartening for me was that, like, there were no Nigerian filmmakers in those books. Like, when they talk about filmmakers, they talk about Gaston Kabore, they talk about Suleiman Cisse, you know, Usman Semben, and all of that, right? And there were no Nigerian filmmakers. So it was huge for me to go to Ouagadougou because the school is even owned by one of the filmmakers that I really liked. That was Gaston Kabore. But at the time, there was no internet. So you can't be able to even see any clip or trailer of some of those films, except like maybe when the NFC is showing us sometimes. So I went there and meeting Gaston Kabore and listening to him. And of course, he brought in a lot of other storylines. I mean, script teachers from Canada and Ireland, and that was when I really understood how to write a script, right, and how to actually tell a story. And we had a lot of access to his library, where there were a lot of films by those real African filmmakers that we had never had access to, and I watched all of them. It was part of my huge development too, in terms of like, I mean, in African cinema, and really understanding it, because it just like got me a notch ahead of like, I mean, other people who had no access to watching some of those films and hearing them talk. And yeah, so that was what it was with Ouagadougou. So even though that I was there for 4 weeks, I think that 4 weeks or 6 weeks, I can't remember. But it had a huge impact on me in terms of screenwriting, that I have to always talk about it when I talk about where I studied. Because apart from the NFI, like, because if I didn't go to Ouagadougou, I'm not sure I would have been able to understand screenwriting the way it was, because we did a lot of analysis of movies and looking at scripts as well. So it was very different, because it was the first time that we had like an audiovisual aid to really teach us, because in Nigeria it was always just about the lecturer telling you what to do, and without really showing anything, any reference material.
Okay. So I'm guess like from what you've said, also like analyzing scripts is a good way to understand story and to, you know, push the boundaries of your own writing.
Yeah, I mean, analyzing scripts, yes, but then I think like majorly analyzing films. Like again, one of the stuff that I did at the NFI was that internet was pretty expensive. I think it was 25 naira a minute at the time. But I used to go to the cyber cafe to go to sites like joblo.com. And joblo.com was the guy that I had access to, who was always writing critics of films. So I could actually just read his critique of film and then watch the film and try to understand where he's coming from and where the filmmaker got it wrong. I did all of that because you really need to study. And then when you watch the films as well, you need to understand, okay, what is character development? Like, I mean, how does the plot go? Like, what other elements the director actually use? All of that make you understand, like, what sort of elements to add to your writing. And so, again, I read a lot of scripts as well, like most of the scripts, because I remember even the script of this film, I Am Legend, that later on was with Will Smith. I had read the script at the time, So I read a lot of all of the scripts online, and so it really add to it. Like, you can't actually be lazy as a filmmaker, is what I'm trying to say. Like, you need to always constantly watch films and try to analyze them and read criticisms and critical essays on the films by other people.
Yeah. Okay, so just to break things up a bit, I'll ask you, what are like 3 random facts about you that most people don't know?
So most people don't know that I was a pretty good footballer, and I was a top striker, right, for my local team. I scored a lot of goals. Most people don't know that.
Yeah.
And of course, like, I can run very fast. Yeah. What is it again? And that I'm pretty good at video games as well. So away from all the whole intellectual conversation, I'm actually like a mini child at heart.
I guess so. It's always good, apart from working, to take a break. Then you always have time to get new perspectives.
Yeah. I think when I actually work, when I work pretty hard, even when I come back from sets, sometimes I just play video game, like, and I play video game online because, like, when you meet somebody who is better than you,
yeah,
like, it really expands your brain, like, and it makes you to like forget about all the problems. Like, the whole tiredness just goes out of your body. Like, that's how it works for me.
Yeah.
And so, or if I don't feel like sleeping and I play, I can actually just get like exhausted mentally. So it's always just like my form of escapism. But there are lots of other things that I do as well. But it's just centered around games that you can't just do.
Okay. So have you had like any experience on set that kind of made you reassess like how you work? Has there been any moment like that?
I mean, unfortunately, no. Like, I've never had that because I think, like, from when I started working from 2006 to the BBC, I was like almost like a child,
Yeah.
And so in order to prove myself, like, I had to do a lot of work. And for me, I think, like, I wasn't even trying to prove myself. It was just coming naturally. Like, you do your homework, and when you get on set, the crew and the actors feel that you know what you're doing, and you actually do know what you're doing, and you're never going to have any problems. So, and I've always learned to be ready, to prepare before getting on set.
Yeah.
So I don't really have anything that I will say that, okay, it was so bad that I have to actually reassess, the way I work. No. I mean, production problems can actually happen, but I mean, production problems can happen everywhere. I mean, look at the one that happened with Alec Baldwin, like, I mean, recently, yeah. Like, so it can happen. But like, in terms of like, for me as a director, no. I always prepare. So, and because imagine that you're always working with celebrities. So I've been working with celebrities since that time and up to now, and I've never had any problems with any celebrity. I mean, they always respect, what I do. There's no one that has ever disrespected me. Okay. And that for me is like, how I do on set, yes. Because the way you do it is very important, right? Like, and if they are stars, you have to make them feel that they are stars. Like, there's no reason to do any sort of like power play, because you always just want people to just like help you interpret your idea and move on to edit it.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so you worked with Tunde Adelese on Confusion Hour, and then years later when you were doing the Lost Cafe, you also worked with her.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that kind of always makes filmmakers or directors want to work with certain actors over and over again?
Yeah. I mean, again, like, as I said, like, coming from a real cinema background, I've seen how maybe Tarantino will work with Uma Thurman, or how Martin Scorsese will work with Robert De Niro at the time, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, and there's this whole thing where they always say you need to always just like find the right person for your project.
Yeah.
Now, I've worked with Tunde Aladeshe as a writer. We worked on the program called The Station. It was a writing gig for a European Union TV series on conflict resolution.
Yeah.
And so talking with Tunde and then looking at her, I told her that like she really fits the profile of like a character that we were developing, because that was when we were developing Confusion Now. And so years later, when I was about to years later, I saw Tunde on a stage play. She wrote V monologues.
Yeah.
And as one of the writers, the director said, "Oh yeah, why don't you just like play one of the roles?" And I saw her on stage, and she was with Bimbo Akintola, great like Bimbo Akintola, Omoni, and a lot of other, actors. And she really stood out. She was really beautiful in it, right? And so it actually reinforced my belief that I wasn't wrong when I said I was actually going to use her for my project, because of course nobody knows, she was just a writer.
Yeah.
And so when Confusion Now came, I called her and said, "Okay, yes, there's a role that I want you to play." And because I also wanted an actress that looks beautiful, like she's slender. She has this particular look, because most Nollywood actors at the time, if you go back 2010, they almost all look the same, and most of them are older on screen,
Yeah.
right? And you just wanted somebody that's like looks young and almost like naive, basically. And so yeah, she actually fit it. And when it came into the Lost Cafe, it was the same thing, right? And the thing with Tunde is that she's very intelligent, and it was very difficult to have actors that are really at that level. Young people that are really at that level, because for you to understand a character, you need to actually read. So she's a big reader because she actually studied English and she reads a lot.
Yeah.
So when you tell her something, she can actually research on it. And it was not very common at that time that people would just like research on characters and all of that. So with the Lost Cafe, it was the same thing. Like she just fit it. And it was almost like perfect, because she went on after Confusion Now to study in Germany. And she studied in Germany. And of course, Germany is a very lonely country, in some parts.
Yeah.
And yes, so putting in a Scandinavian country, she will totally understand how a lonely white black girl will feel in a white country.
Yeah. Okay. And you guys shot the Lost Cafe in Nigeria and also in Norway. How was it handling like a cross-country production?
It was cool. It's basically because my producer lives in Norway, and of course, she lives in Nigeria and Norway, and she's from Calabar. It was really easy to just to organize some of the logistics. I think like one of the things that we had with a logistical problem that we had was that when we wanted Angino lens,
yeah,
and they were going to give it for free, but in Norway it is very different because the customs are, they are really, really tight. They are when it comes to like checking products and what comes into the country.
Yeah,
they always they take it serious basically, and we didn't have 5,000 euros to pay. For the lenses, and so Angino had to help us like sort out the custom clearance again. So for me, yeah, it was but being in Norway, the difference for me is this, right? The camera that we got in Nigeria, we had to rent it, we had to look for this, we had to look for that, right? But in Norway, there's actually a particular company that has equipment just for young people to come and access for free to make films.
Nice.
Yes, and that was actually what happened over there. And it is for me what like we've been clamoring for in Nigeria, because we don't even have any form of like co-production treaty with another country to make a film that you will say that you can access money at federal level.
Yeah.
So yeah, so are the things that I actually saw. Like it was way easier to shoot in Europe, right, than it was to shoot in Nigeria.
Yeah. Okay, so like, do you think is there like a I don't know, a way of kind of making our voices heard? Because several countries have these treaties. There are always tax rebates when you shoot in countries, and it definitely helps get the job done. Do you think like for individual filmmakers or groups of filmmakers, is there anything you think they can do that might get us closer to these co-production treaties?
Well, for years we've been talking about it. We've always been talking about it, and I think like we're almost even tired of talking about it. I remember in 2017 I was a speaker at the Bola Tinubu colloquium, which will have the biggest, policy makers in Nigeria, right? Because it's the better of Bola Tinubu, and of course, like the vice president was there. A lot of people, everybody, people were there. And I was actually trying to make a case for the National Endowment Fund for Arts. And I said that I make my film, but I have to always go to Europe to go and look for funding, which, like, it's an irony because I'm making a Nigerian film with European money, right? Because there's actually no agency that you could say that will give you some form of funding here. And then the funding from Europe will always be in the form of grants, because there's either you have majority producer or minority producer, right?
Yeah.
And most times Europe will be majority producer when you actually get money from there. But then there's not even money from like an institution that you can actually have. And so even when you come to film, you're not even going to talk about tax rebates and stuff like that, because they don't even really understand it. We've been talking about even, okay, can we even do like some sort of like film commission? No. People have really been hammering on this. A lot of like veteran filmmakers have been hammering on this thing, but it's almost like it is not really happening. The closest was with the French when they came. And so we're with the French embassy and we're having conversations, but there were still problems politically between the National Film Institute, the Nigerian Film Corporation and the National Film and Video Censors Board.
Yeah.
You know, because like everybody wants to be, it's my agency that is supposed to lead this, or it's my agency that is supposed to lead that. But the thing is that they don't really understand that they need to unify in order to just like fight for a common goal. But no. So no, we've been having these challenges, I'm telling you. And I think like the last one, even trying to access Norwegian money, because like they have almost like 70 million euros, I think, in a year for grants. But imagine if we could actually access some of it. But like we can't. So it's always about private funding. And yeah, I don't know what to do anymore. Yeah. So I guess it will happen, because I heard that very soon there's going to be a signing between Nigeria and France. But yeah, it's all, we need to just keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, hopefully it happens very soon. Yeah. Okay, so Oloture, what was your process in preparing, to work on that project, taking in mind like, being true to the material? Like, how did you approach it?
For me, I was working on a project called El Dorado Road.
Oh, okay.
And the project was at the 2016 Waga Film Lab, because I applied and I got into Waga Film Lab, and it was the first lab in Africa for people to develop their projects. And basically, it is a project that is around migration, about the road to hell. So the road to hell for me is the desert, right, all the way to North Africa.
Yeah. And
so I was developing that project, and I won the pitching competition. So I won the Yave prize because I won the pitching competition. And so I went for a 1-year program in 2017 at the Yave Producers Workshop. So it was in Luxembourg, Holland, and Denmark. And we were told on how to package our projects, and we did a lot of development in terms of writing. I was there with my writer, Tom Rollins-Race. And so when you're actually developing your project, you get to do a lot of research. Now, in 2018, Evident Life got in touch with me that they are working on a story. And so they told me, it's on sex trafficking. And I said, okay. So when I read it, I told them, so I had to do like a full disclosure. I told them, okay, so guys, I'm actually working on another trafficking story as well, right? Just so that they know, because you need to always be open about this. And so, I read the script for Oloture then it was called On the Verge. I really loved it. And then we had to change the title to, Oloture. And so, we made the film, but already, as I said, I was developing a project about trafficking. So I had already done a lot of research, which was what actually drew me close to the material. So for me, it was like, okay, what happened before they get on the road to hell, basically, which is actually where Oloture ends.
Yeah. Okay, the film did really well. Netflix picked it up, and a dream of a filmmaker is for people.
It was actually fantastic. It didn't really do pretty well. It was like absolutely fantastic, because it was the first time that Nigerian film was actually entering a top 10 of Netflix, right? First time. And yes, when we actually had a review with Netflix, we had 60% completion rate, and they told us the number that Oloture has hit. And right now, like, I mean, it is still the most watched Nigerian film on Netflix. So no, it didn't do pretty well. It was actually fantastic.
Yeah.
And actually brought in a lot of conversations, like, I mean, around trafficking and people. And there's still, like, I mean, programs that are actually happening right now in Nigeria as a result of that film. So yeah, like, I mean, it was pretty big for Nigeria.
Yeah. Okay, so talking about trafficking, you've worked with like a lot of NGOs, social issues, and this Oloture is also like the theme, which is human trafficking. It's also like a social issue. I mean, the question I asked you earlier, I don't know. I think there's this trend. Like I feel possibly like one of the things you are always drawn to is these human stories that revolve around some of these social issues. So yeah, it's just something I noticed. Yeah.
So okay, so I'm actually glad that you're actually cracking it yourself, right?
Yeah.
So, but on a serious note, I grew up in Jos, and because like you're very close to people, and when people suffer, you will actually see it. Like when people are happy, you will actually see it, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, like, generally, I'm really drawn to very personal stories. Things I can actually relate to. So like right now, I'm working on a blockbuster project that I've been developing for like 4 years. It was even announced in 2019 with RMD.
Okay.
But and still, even though it is supposed to be an film for like escapism, I am still drawn to things that really appeal, that really caught me when I was a kid. So I'm really like, I mean, for me, it's always about that, because and I think it is what Martin Scorsese was trying to say about Marvel films when he got criticized, that there's this whole disconnect now with like films, because you don't really get to be drawn into the characters. It is always just about like, I mean, the effects and the effects and the effects. But for me, like, I really like to deal with like, I mean, human issues, and in whatever situation. And then like, even, I mean, how to even treat them, because there's a thing that I want to explore in our culture that has to do, it's called jute tele, I think. And it's like this thing where a bride can actually be kidnapped, that kind of thing, right? Like so I'm dealing with it, like, I mean, in a huge commercial film, but like, you see, like, I mean, there's an issue there that I'm trying to just like, I mean, address. So yes, I'm really drawn to this sort of stories, and I've always worked with NGOs, because NGOs for me, they make you understand what a human being is going through more.
Yeah.
And I've worked in like nutrition, I've worked in like crisis management, because even at the time that Boko Haram was still in Goza, around Goza, I was in Goza and talking to IDPs and all of that. So I've been to really extreme places, because one thing that it actually does to you is that it takes you very close. So I now understand, like, I mean, the problems that maybe young people face in politics, the problem that women face in politics. I understand, like, I mean, the nutrition problems of the North. Like, so it gives you that whole broad overview that helps you to even mold, like, I mean, your stories and your characters as well.
Yeah. Okay. You worked on Castle and Castle the first season. How did you approach it? I'm sure you are aware that, you are building this world, setting the tone for what could be like a multi-season TV show. How important was it that you do it right in that first season? What are the things that went through your mind approaching the project?
So when I'm working on Castle and Castle, I think, like, I mean, the only thing that I added was try to do some research and try to see that the cases are authentic, right? But it is largely a TV show, and TV shows are actually run by producers, and the producers have to really think about what they want to do with the show, or if they have the ambition of the show continuing and all of that. Yeah. And so and Mo Abudu is very good with things like that. So Mo, Heidi, Temidayo, they actually basically just like try to just give the show a roadmap, because we were 3 directors and I directed the last block of the series. But I think like for me, when I was actually coming, I just thought about shows and how I would always want some sort of movement, like with my characters or with the camera, because I just want it to be a bit boring. And we need to just like, really show up the whole production design of the place. So that is basically how I approached it.
Okay. And I mean, from your education spans from University of Ibadan to NFI to USC, and then Unijust, where you got a master's in film and TV, which you kind of completed last year. So like what you've had a very busy film career. What was this extra thing you were looking for with the masters?
No, for me, I always say that it's just good to just keep learning, right?
Yeah.
And what you can actually just get sometimes, like when you go back to school, is that there's definitely going to be a moment for you to just like sit back and just read and learn about other things, because you can never actually stop learning. There are a lot of there's an ocean of books, written journals out there. Yeah. So the masters for me, it was just to just like relax and just improve on my learning and try to just know that and just know other things. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. So what would you say is one rewatchable film, so like you can watch it multiple times? What's that one film for you?
It's a very hard question. Yeah, because I've never thought about like one rewatchable film. Yeah, but like you could always just see maybe Lawrence of Arabia.
Okay.
Because it's like, for the sort of story and the sort of scale and for the stunning cinematography, I think you could just just play it even without the sound, and it will just be like a photo play on your screen.
Yeah. So what are you working on right now? Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I'm working on a project that is set in 1930s, just at the height of tin mining, and already I have I've been talking with a lot of platforms, but I have actors like RMD, Ramsey Noah, Bovi, and a couple of other stars on this already. So yeah, hopefully it is what I would love to film in 2022. So I'm just going back, so this is since the Lost Cafe, I'm really going back to making another very personal film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fingers crossed. Hopefully, you get to achieve that in 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so what's one thing that you think the Nigerian film industry needs to improve? Like in what way? That one thing that is of I
think Nigerian films can actually make do with the fact that we need to start shooting on a very big scale. The budgets for the films have really increased.
Yeah.
But I think it's almost like the scale of the films are almost the same. So it's almost like from room to parlor to garden, that kind of thing, and to office, And even at that, people are always just filming in natural environments. Nobody's thinking about real production design. So there's no any aesthetic that's actually added for the viewer to be like, oh my God, the world that Christopher Nolan will actually create, for instance, so we need to actually think about moving towards filming with a lot of scale, because even the South Korean movies and series that people are now falling in love with is because they're actually really shooting on a huge scale. I think Squid Games was filmed $12 million, and you've had Nigerian films that have been made with $9 or $10 million. So just look at it, the gap in terms of money is not much. So we need to but the scale is really different.
Yeah. Thanks, Kenneth, for coming on the podcast.
Yeah. Good. And thank you for having me. Yeah.
Okay, and how can people keep up with your work? Do you have social media?
Yeah, my social media is just at Kenneth Gyang. At Kenneth Gyang. That's all. It's the same for Instagram. It's the same for Twitter. And yeah, of course, like our production company, Cinema Pata Pata, is online as well. So yeah.
We have come to the end of this episode. Remember to rate and review the podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Naija Film, and the podcast at the Naija Film Pod to share your feedback. You can now support the podcast by visiting the website to donate. See you on the next episode. Have a good one.